In the summer of 1941, the German army moved with unstoppable force across the Soviet Union. 3 million men, thousands of tanks, the greatest war machine the world had ever seen. By autumn, the Wehrmacht had advanced hundreds of miles into Soviet territory. Cities fell, armies collapsed. The world believed that the Red Army was finished. But nature had other plans. The German Blitzkrieg, that lightning-fast machine of conquest, was about to meet its greatest enemy yet. Not Stalin, not the Soviet army, but Russia itself. This is the story of how the unstoppable panzers of Nazi Germany were slowed, trapped, and buried in the mud of the Eastern Front. By mid-July 1941, the German advance was a masterpiece of modern warfare. 3 massive army groups swept across the vast plains of the Soviet Union. In the north, Army Group North pushed toward Leningrad. In the south, Army Group South stormed through Ukraine. And in the center, the heart of the invasion, Army Group Center drove relentlessly toward Moscow. Hitler believed the Soviet Union would collapse in a matter of weeks. He called it a war of annihilation, and for a time, it seemed he was right. Sound, thunderous tank engines, radio chatter, cheering soldiers. German tanks rolled through Smolensk and Minsk, capturing hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers. The Red Army seemed shattered. Soviet prisoners filled the roads, hungry, wounded, and broken. But even as German forces celebrated, a subtle problem was emerging, one that would soon cripple the entire operation. The farther they advanced, the slower they became. The Blitzkrieg was built for Europe's roads and cities, for fast, short campaigns on firm ground. But the Soviet Union was a different world. There were no paved roads, no reliable bridges, only endless dirt tracks that turned to rivers of mud with the first rain. The German army's greatest weapon, mobility, began to turn against them. As summer ended, the skies opened. The Rasputitsa had arrived, the infamous Russian season of mud. Visuals: tanks stuck in thick brown sludge, soldiers pushing trucks with wooden planks. Vehicles sank up to their axles. Tanks that once raced across France now crawled at walking speed, or didn't move at all. Every mile forward was a battle against the land itself. Mechanics worked day and night to free engines clogged with mud. Supply trucks got lost in endless forests, and horses, 750,000 of them, replaced fuel trucks as the main source of transport. Germany's modern army was reverting to the 19th century. For the first time, the Soviets found an advantage. The same terrain that crippled the Germans became their shield. In the swamps of the Dnieper and the forests near Smolensk, Soviet resistance hardened. Soldiers who had once fled now stood and fought. And then came the machine that would change everything, the T-34. Visuals: Soviet T-34 tanks moving through muddy terrain with ease, shells firing. The T-34 was not just a tank, it was a revelation. Sloped armor, wide tracks, and a powerful gun made it nearly unstoppable in mud. German tank crews were stunned. Their panzers, once invincible, were suddenly outmatched. One German officer wrote, "The T-34 is superior to any tank we have. It crosses terrain we cannot, and it hits harder than we can return." The myth of Blitzkrieg began to crumble. The weather turned from bad to worse. Days of rain became weeks. The roads vanished beneath a sea of mud. Soldiers were forced to push their tanks by hand. Supply lines collapsed. Food, fuel, and ammunition became impossible to deliver. Commanders reported, "The men are starving, the vehicles cannot move, the horses are dying." Meanwhile, Soviet partisans attacked from behind enemy lines, cutting roads, blowing up bridges, and ambushing convoys. The German army was being eaten alive by the land itself. As conditions worsened, Hitler took more control of operations, with disastrous results. His generals pleaded to halt and regroup, but Hitler demanded more. He refused to retreat. He refused to slow down. Instead, he split the advance, ordering one thrust toward Leningrad, another toward Kiev, and one toward Moscow. It was a fatal decision. The German army was now overstretched, too thin to strike decisively, too weak to defend effectively. Every division was exhausted, every tank strained, every soldier worn down by weeks of fighting, hunger, and mud. By late October, the mud finally began to freeze. For the Germans, it seemed like salvation, but salvation came with a deadly price. The mud turned to ice, the roads hardened, and so did the cold. The Wehrmacht had marched into Russia expecting victory by summer. They carried no winter gear, no boots, no coats, no fuel for heat. As they pushed toward Moscow, the temperature dropped below 20 degrees. Engines froze, oil turned to glue, weapons jammed, and men began to die, not from bullets, but from the cold. The Blitzkrieg was over. The German army was no longer a lightning strike. It was a frozen shadow. Operation Barbarossa was meant to be Germany's greatest triumph. Instead, it became the beginning of its downfall. The panzers that once raced through Europe were now buried in the mud and ice of Russia. Hitler had underestimated not just his enemy, but the land itself. And the men who marched east, proud, confident, unstoppable, would soon learn what no conqueror had ever forgotten: Russia devours empires. The Blitzkrieg was dead. The war was only beginning.